Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. You are diving head first into the Stone Zone. Well, Bill and Hillary Clinton are not very happy because for the first time in their long political careers, they're being held accountable and responsible. They have been subpoenaed to appear next week before the House Oversight Committee that is probing their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And Hillary Clinton is whining about it in an incredible interview with BBC. Let's listen to this.
What we're seeing, I think it's fair to say, is a continuing cover-up by the Trump administration. In fact, when the Attorney General testified last week, it was quite a scene because she refused to answer questions. She diverted attention away from the matters at hand. She refused to look at the survivors. So there's something about this administration's attitude toward this, which I think really leads us to conclude they have something to hide. We don't. We have been willing to say whatever we know. We've even done it under oath. But they want us to testify, not everyone else who's mentioned many, many times, hundreds of thousands of times in these files. So we've said, fine, let us do it in public. And we will appear in public and we'll answer all your questions.
And we'll get to that in just a moment. But just to be clear, do you regret the links that there have been?
You know, we have no links. We have a very clear record that we've been willing to talk about, which my husband has said. He took some rides on the airplane for his charitable work. I don't recall ever meeting him.
Did you ever meet Ghislaine Maxwell?
I did on a few occasions, and thousands of people go to the Clinton Global Initiative. So it to me is not something that is really at the heart of what this matter is about. They are accused, and in both cases were convicted of horrific crimes against girls and women. That should be the focus. And we are more than happy to say what we know, which is very limited and totally unrelated to their behavior or their crimes. And we want to do it in public because let's make this transparent. The survivors deserve that. The public deserves that. But, you know, the Republican member of Congress who is running this hearing or this investigation is trying to protect the president. So let's get to what's really at stake here.
That is an extraordinary act of dissembling and deflection. I guess Hillary Clinton would like us to forget that after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted in Florida of sex crimes, he provided the seed capital for the foundation of the Clinton Foundation, as well as the Clinton Global Initiative. She said Bill was on his plane a few times. It's more like 27 times. And until weeks ago, Bill Clinton had publicly denied ever being on Epstein's island. But the sworn testimony of Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims, and two other victims whose testimony I read, these are women who didn't settle with Epstein but went forward with their lawsuits against him, both insist that Bill was seen. In fact, Virginia Giuffre said that on this particular occasion, Jeffrey Epstein had flown in two 17-year-old twin sisters for Bill's amusement. Doug Band, the president's chief of staff, also on the island. Look, Hillary Clinton is a short-tempered, foul-mouthed, entitled kleptocrat, and she's extraordinarily bitter about losing the election to Donald Trump, so bitter that she and her cohorts invented the Russian collusion hoax. And let's remember, not long ago, Tulsi Gabbard declassified intelligence from the Russians, who had learned that Hillary Clinton had to be heavily medicated because of her mental stability, because of her rages, mostly over losing the election. It will be nice to see the Clintons held accountable. It is not lost on me that I wrote probably the most important book exposing the Clintons' corruption, the Clintons' war on women, and that every single member of the Mueller prosecution team who came after me had previously worked for Hillary Clinton. In the meantime, Steve Bannon has even more problems. News today that Bannon was hit with an investor class action lawsuit over his administration of a Bitcoin company, the Let's Go Brandon Coin LLC. I think they also were the progenitors of the F Joe Biden coin. Now, that is, of course, only an allegation, but this is the same Steve Bannon who pled guilty in New York to having bilked donors to the Build the Wall Foundation out of $15 million. Bothers me is that Steve Bannon's co-conspirators served long prison sentences, while Steve pled guilty and served no jail time at all. Here on the Stone Zone, we have meticulously analyzed the mountain of evidence that Stinky Steve Bannon's collaboration with Jeffrey Epstein, as Bannon curried favor with Epstein, according to these shocking emails. This first came to my attention in 2018 when I saw an item in the New York Post that said that Steve Bannon was seen entering Jeffrey Epstein's palatial home in Manhattan. I believe it is the largest, most expensive single-family home in all of Manhattan. Today, Bannon is out with his cover story. It took him 4 days to come up with it, but it was all about his being a journalist. So he, in emails with Jeffrey Epstein, he denigrates Trump as stupid. He calls for Trump's removal under the 25th Amendment. He brags about undermining President Trump's trade policies with China. He says that he, Steve Bannon, is the center of the America First MAGA movement, not Donald Trump. Now we're supposed to believe that he was sucking up to Epstein. He was coaching Epstein on how to erase his public image as a pedophile, as a child sex trafficker, in an effort to cozy up to him in order to make a documentary. Frankly, it just doesn't really fly when you see the text of these actual emails. The emails show Bannon being offered favors by Epstein, including travel and medical services. It is very, very odd, but anybody who reads these would recognize that Bannon is coaching Epstein, supposedly for what he says today is some upcoming documentary. Now, there's 15 minutes of film between this disheveled, odorous, gin-soaked blob, Steve Bannon, and Jeffrey Epstein. Only 2 hours have been released by the Department of Justice, which I find curious. Why not release all 13 hours of the video? I suspect that Michael Wolff, the author who is cozy with both Bannon and Epstein, is correct when he says that Bannon was preparing Epstein for a 60 Minutes interview that was scheduled 2 days after Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport while arriving on his private jet from Paris. Particularly disturbing here to me is Bannon's advocacy of removing Donald Trump under the 25th Amendment. So while he's on television or on his podcast claiming to be the last Trump loyalist, he's undermining Trump, believing that he is somehow the centerpiece of this movement, when the centerpiece of this movement is only one man. The man who elected Donald Trump is not Roger Stone, it's not Steve Bannon, certainly, nor is it Paul Manafort. The man who elected Donald Trump, well, that would be Donald J. Trump. He had his own way of going about this. The first presidential campaign in American history not to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on broadcast television and cable, but a one-man public relations machine who simply outworked his Republican opponents for the nomination and then outworked Hillary Clinton. We will keep you up to date on the Bannon scandal as it appears to get only deeper. There are some questions about Bannon's very shady Chinese financier. There's a fellow by the name of Miles Guo. Interesting case in which he's under oath and pleads the fifth 55 times when asked where the source of his money is, the money that he is using to fund Steve Bannon. And of course, there are also reports, we believe credible, that Bannon was paying a very large number of so-called influencers, which is why you don't see everybody doing what I have done, which is to call Stephen Bannon out for his outright treachery against the president. It's interesting, Bannon became a bit of a martyr because he went to prison rather than testify under subpoena for the January 6th committee. This is unnecessary theatrics. I was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, so was General Michael Flynn. I fulfilled my legal obligations by showing up and asserting my Fifth Amendment right not to answer questions, not because I had anything to hide, not because I particularly knew anything, but because I had extensive experience of how House Democrats take innocuous things you say under oath and twist those into a process crime. So Steve Bannon, I don't know if he just got bad legal advice or if he was trying to position himself as some kind of martyr. He refused to testify, for which he was, not surprisingly, charged and sentenced. Now the Department of Justice, very strangely, is trying to vacate Steve Bannon's conviction, to which I say, okay, that's great, but are you also going to vacate the conviction of Peter Navarro, who I think was rather brutally arrested in public for the same crime, alleged crime, of refusing to testify for a House committee? Of course, when Eric Holder was the Attorney General and he was sent a subpoena on the Fast and Furious scandal, he thumbed his nose at Congress and told them to stick it, and there was no effort to prosecute him. We're going to be watching this issue very carefully. Bannon is out there today with his spin. It was all about journalism. It was all about my documentary. That's why I was unctuously sucking up to one of the greatest criminals and sex criminals and pedophiles of all time. We'll have more on the other side about politics today. Jesse Jackson, a giant in the civil rights movement, a good friend, oddly enough, of Donald Trump, dead at 84. We'll talk about that on the other side. Jackson and Trump had a very interesting relationship. Donald Trump gave free office space to the Rainbow Project when Jesse Jackson was on his way to making history as the first Black American to run for president of the United States. We'll be right back with some memories about Jesse Jackson and more politics on the other side. Thanks for tuning in to the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
Rural
Americans deserve access to the best of what our country has to offer, especially health care. Across every state, every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care. Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Civil rights activist and two-time presidential candidate Jesse Jackson has died at the age of 84. Jackson, of course, rose to national prominence in the 1960s, first as an associate of Dr. Martin Luther King, and later became one of the most recognizable figures in modern liberal politics. Over decades, he organized protests, voter drives, and corporate pressure campaigns through his Operation Push and the Rainbow Push Coalition. Jackson, of course, historically ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1984 and 1988, being the first African American to do so, helping reshape the party's coalition politics and emphasizing identity-based organizing that would later define modern progressive activism. Supporters credit him with expanding political participation among minority voters, while critics argue his confrontational tactics and racial rhetoric deepened the divisions rather than healed them. President Trump, very graciously writing on True Social, the Reverend Jesse Jackson is dead at 84. I knew him well, long before becoming president. He was a good man with a lot of personality, grit, and street smarts. He was very gregarious, someone who truly loved people. Despite the fact that I am falsely and consistently called a racist by the scoundrels and lunatics on the radical left, all Democrats, it was always my pleasure to help Jesse along the way. I provided office space for him at 40 Wall Street, responded to his a request for help in getting criminal justice reform passed. That's the First Step Act and the Second Chance Act, and signed it when no other president would even try. I also single-handedly pushed and passed long-term funding for historical black colleges and universities, which Jesse loved. But also with other presidents would not do. I also responded to Jesse's support for opportunity zones, the single most successful economic development package yet approved for minority business, men and women, and much, much more. Jesse was a force of nature like few others before him. He had much to do with the election of a man he didn't particularly like, Barack Obama. He loved his family greatly, and to them I send my greatest sympathies and condolences. Jesse Jackson will be missed. Signed, President Donald Trump. What he says is true. Jackson tended within the Democratic Party to be aligned with the Clintons, where his arch rival, the Reverend Al Sharpton, tended to be much more closely aligned with Barack and Michelle Obama. It's amazing how all of these civil rights leaders loved Donald Trump until he climbed into the political arena and decided to make America great again. Yet he was the president who gave us criminal justice reform when Democrats talked about it. He is the one to sign that bill. We'll talk about it when we come back right here in the Stone Zone.
It's the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
It is a great, great person, Roger Stone.
The Stone Zone. This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Now, while it's true that President Richard Nixon launched the war on drugs, the war on drugs under Nixon was aimed at drug traffickers and drug kingpins. It was Joe Biden, as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and President Bill Clinton, who weaponized the 1994 crime bill to go after the end user. In other words, to prosecute people for the first time, nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use. Now, for many decades, the House Black Caucus objected to that and wanted it changed, wanted it reformed. It was not until President Donald Trump became president that you did change that, the First Step Act and the Second Chance Act, changing this rubric in which people convicted of first-time nonviolent crimes are sentenced to these harsh mandatory penalties where a judge has no ability to take into consideration other factors. So the single mother of three who gets caught with a small amount of weed in her purse is not looking at a 10-year sentence. This is the hypocrisy of the Democratic left, because members of the House Black Caucus voted against President Trump's reforms, not because they were opposed to them in concept, but simply because President Trump himself proposed them. It is among his greatest accomplishments. Meanwhile, newly released Justice Department records are tying Jeffrey Epstein to fresh questions about the Obama administration's handling of a 2012 Secret Service prostitution scandal in Cartagena, Colombia. The documents reveal extensive communications between convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Catherine Rummler, who was President Obama's former White House counsel, who would later become Goldman Sachs' top lawyer. Rummler would step down this week after questions regarding her relationship with Epstein emerged from these emails. The emails reportedly show that she maintained a long-term relationship with Epstein, calling him Uncle Jeffrey, accepting gifts, and even seeking his advice on legal and reputational crises. The controversy traces back to the Summit of the Americas in 2012, when Secret Service agents and personnel were caught hiring prostitutes to entertain them. Investigators also uncovered hotel records indicating a White House advance team volunteer had a prostitute checked into his room. The White House later declared there was no indication of misconduct by any of its personnel. But in 2014, a Washington Post investigative story revived the entire thing, reporting the officials possessed evidence at the time that they did not fully disclose. According to the new emails, Epstein advised the White House counsel on how to respond to reporters and contain the fallout from this prostitution scandal. She even shared a draft response with him before publicly pushing back on the allegations. Shortly afterward, Rumler withdrew from consideration to be Attorney General. The revelations come as she stepped down this week from her role at Goldman Sachs following the release of the Epstein files by the U.S. Department of Justice. Critics say the issue goes well beyond scandal. It raises serious ethical concerns about a top White House lawyer consulting a notorious convicted criminal while managing a politically damaging investigation. Epstein's influence was seen in Democrat presidential administrations spanning decades. Look at the number of times he visited the Obama White House. I believe it is more than 12 times. More must be uncovered about all of those who colluded with Epstein. That's why I'm in favor of full and complete disclosure. I'm sick of reading online about reports on 4chan that some chauffeur saw Roger Stone on Epstein's Island. We knew it was him because he had his shirt off and we could see his Nixon tattoo. That is completely and totally false. It's defamatory. I'd be laughing about it, except for it gets repeated with such irregularity. In fact, I'm the first American journalist, I think, or the second, to expose Epstein and his relationships with the powered elite like Bill and Hillary Clinton, Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, the billionaire Bill Gates, the Secretary of the Treasury Larry Summers, and others. All of this in my 2014 book. I'm in favor of full disclosure. I want the U.S. Justice Department to release all of the emails. The only thing I want to see redacted are the names of the victims. I do think the victims should be protected, but beyond that, there's no reason to, for example, release 2 hours of Jeffrey Epstein's interview with Steve Bannon and sit on the other 13 hours. Full disclosure, I have nothing to be concerned about either, just President Donald Trump. So I would like to see everything released, and I've been stalwart about that from the beginning. Meanwhile, Kentucky Republicans are preparing for a major turning point as their longtime senator, former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell plans his retirement after 4 decades in Washington. The primary to replace him has quickly become a referendum on the direction of the party. Establishment conservatism against the newer America First movement shaped by President Donald Trump. It's odd because Mitch McConnell headed off the impeachment of Donald Trump in the U.S. Senate, but today he refuses to vote for the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is not complicated. It's a federal law that says you must be a U.S. citizen in order to vote for a federal election, and you must have an ID in order to prove it. No big deal, right? Well, except for Senator Mitch McConnell is against it, former Republican Senate Majority Leader. The candidates vying for his seat in Kentucky include former Attorney General Daniel Cameron, Congressman Andy Barr, and a wealthy businessman, Nate Morris, but they're all trying to distance themselves from McConnell, who denied any election fraud, who constantly spoke out against the MAGA agenda during his time as the Senate Majority Leader. It appears that Morris, the businessman, has positioned himself more aggressively as a break from the past, while Congressman Barr highlights his work for Trump's campaign, and Cameron stresses his independence from party power brokers despite being seen as McConnell's hand-picked successor. The shift reflects broader changes going inside the Republican Party, where loyalty to the American First agenda increasingly outweighs seniority and institutional influence. Despite declining approval rating among some conservatives, McConnell's allies argue that his overall results, judges, tax policy victories, and funding for military bases and law enforcement strengthens both Kentucky and the nation, and certainly there were some accomplishments by McConnell, but he joined the U.S. Senate as a county judge with nothing to his name. He leaves the Senate worth tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars. So I have an obvious question as to how that could possibly be true. We will see in Kentucky where this party is headed, whether we're going to be a country of endless debt, countless war, and repeated violations of the Constitution, meanwhile outsourcing our best jobs, or whether we're going to put America first. America became much weaker under Mitch McConnell's watch, and as such, his legacy is considered toxic to those candidates who want his seat. Nobody wants to identify as Mitch McConnell's candidate. Whoever wins the primary will almost certainly win the seat in this deep red state, and hopefully the Kentucky voters will choose real MAGA over fake MAGA when they're making decisions as who to support to be their nominee. Meanwhile, Russia is signaling it would pause airstrikes on Ukraine if Kyiv agrees to hold national elections, a proposal that is putting fresh scrutiny on the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's continued suspension of voting under martial law. So when those on the left tell you the war between Russia and Ukraine is about democracy with a small d, point out that Zelensky has not allowed there to be any general election, that he prosecutes journalists, and that he shuts down newspapers, radio stations, that he's even outlawed the largest church in the country. No, this is not in any way about democracy. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin said Moscow would ensure no strikes would be allowed to occur on an election day, echoing similar comments from Russian President Vladimir Putin, suggesting Ukrainians should be allowed to determine their leadership despite the ongoing war. After all, we had multiple elections during World War II. We re-elected Franklin Roosevelt in 1944 during the middle of World War II. So why hasn't Ukraine scheduled an election? Zelensky has repeatedly delayed elections since this conflict began, citing security concerns. But the truth is, democratic governments are defined precisely by holding elections during hardship, not suspending them indefinitely. Seems pretty hypocritical to me that the U.S. and the West are giving aid to Ukraine, billions of dollars, while they openly flout the concept of a free and fair election. Perhaps Zelensky realizes that if he had an election, well, he would probably lose. Ukraine claims a parliamentary committee is still reviewing whether security guarantees could make a vote possible today. Russia also insists millions of displaced Ukrainians living in Russian-controlled regions should be allowed to participate if there is a vote. Kyiv, that's the capital of Ukraine, has rejected similar proposals in the past over alleged concerns of voter manipulation. The Kremlin claims it held voting near combat zones during its own 2024 election, despite Ukrainian sabotage attempts. Ukrainian officials counter that safety and international monitoring must be assured before any vote can proceed. The deeper issue, I guess, here is legitimacy. More evidence is mounting that the Ukrainian people are sick of Zelensky and his corruption. Members of his administration are dropping like flies as his cronies are exposed for embezzling. No doubt much more of the aid has gone up Zelensky's nose as well. The time for excuses is over. We deserve free and fair elections in Ukraine. Most Americans still don't understand that when East and West Germany were allowed to unify, and the Russians agreed to that, we, the United States, agreed in return not to push Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine is, of course, on Russia's borders. That means we agreed not to put NATO-based missiles paid for by American taxpayers on the ground in Ukraine pointed at Russia. We actually codified this in the Budapest Memorandum signed by Secretary of State James Baker on behalf of the United States, and again later in the Minsk Accords, another set of agreements. But Joe Biden violated that pledge. This is very much like the situation in 1962 when Nikita Khrushchev, the Russian dictator, put Russian thermonuclear missiles on the little island of Cuba. President John F. Kennedy did not react well, and we were told America came closer to nuclear war than any time in our recent history. You can understand that this has always been Putin's line in the sand, and that if we continue to push for the inclusion of Ukraine in NATO, this war will never end. The U.S. media has done a pretty good job of trying to convince us that Ukraine can still win this war, but that does not seem likely, according to any of the military experts that I respect. In the meantime, the NATO nations, who Donald Trump had to call to account for not paying their fair share for their own protection, continue to goad Zelensky on in ignoring the peace overtures of both Donald Trump, who seems to get the Russians lined up, and then Zelensky falls up. Then he seems to get Zelensky lined up, and the Russians fall away. Trump is, above all, a deal maker, and he understands that history has no higher position. There is no greater honor, no greater title in history than that of peacemaker. He's intended to end this strife, and I thought he handled it very well during the debates when he was asked at a town meeting whether he wanted Russia to win or whether he wanted Ukraine to win. And he said, "I want the killing to stop." And there you have it. There you have Donald Trump, the man, peacemaker. Still think he will reach an agreement here. He is certainly trying. I pray for peace every day, as I know you do. The president understands the importance of his record on the foreign affairs, whether it is Venezuela, what is the new pressure he's now putting on Cuba. But he also recognizes that the 2026 elections will be about the economy, dropping food prices, dropping gas prices, greater availability and affordability of housing, a record stock market, record low unemployment, record low inflation. These are the conditions that will oversee the 2026 election. And those who say the Republicans have already lost don't understand that in American politics, with the volatility of our electorate being the way it is today, a week is a lifetime. We'll be right back with the Roger Stone portion of the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks.
Is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
And he's a great, great person, Roger Stone.
The Stone Zone.
Instagram teen accounts have automatic protections for what teens see and who can contact them, plus time management tools. And Instagram will continue adding built-in safety features to help create age-appropriate experiences. Learn more about teen accounts and Instagram's ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teen accounts.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Well, New York City homeowners are about to learn that elections have consequences. Socialist Mayor Zohran Mamdani is proposing the city's first property tax hike in more than 20 years to close a roughly $5 billion budget gap, even after Albany already pledged billions in additional aid to New York City. City officials say that the plan relies not only on higher taxes, but also on extremely optimistic revenue projections and reserve spending. The mayor has also pushed for higher income tax on top earners and increased corporate taxes, part of a broader agenda that includes rent controls, universal child care, free transit, and a $30 minimum wage. Mamdani makes all of these lofty promises just as weeks ago the administration warned of a $12.6 billion deficit. Then rising Wall Street bonuses and tax receipts suddenly shrank that shortfall, yet taxpayers are still being asked to pay more. Homeowners already saw assessed property values jump over 5%, generating additional revenues before any rate increase even takes effect. Critics say this reflects a familiar pattern in big city governance, expanding spending first, then look to taxpayers to cover the difference. Socialists like Mamdani argue that the wealthy should shoulder the burden, but property taxes rarely stay targeted. They cascade through rents, housing costs, and down to small businesses, hitting middle-class residents actually the hardest. This will then lead to more socialist solutions. It will only lead to more problems and more unintended consequences. It will also lead to capital and businesses leaving New York to go to more business favor locations. They don't seem to understand that high taxes merely give people the opportunity to leave. After many years of socialists promising affordability, New York will instead get higher living costs and slower economic growth. Americans need to look at this mess in New York City as a template for what we do not want to do in the nation. Particularly troubling is a new law pushed by the mayor that says if you're a private property owner and you choose to sell your property, you must first offer that property for sale to the city government. Only after the city government elects not to buy your property are you allowed to put it on the open market. But if you do put it on the open market and you get an offer, you must now give the city of New York kind of a second look. I think this is unconstitutional, a violation of private property rights. But many people in this most recent election voted for hope and change without really focusing on what Mamdani's policies would really mean for the average New Yorker. Combination of high tax policies and soft on crime policies are going to continue the mass exodus of what's left of the middle class in New York City as they move to the suburbs or even out of state, many of them coming to my home state of Florida. I said when Mamdani was elected that there would be a silver lining, and that silver lining is that the entire country will be able to see what happens when you elect a radical, a Muslim, jihadist, socialist as a mayor. And this can only help bolster the Republicans in the 2026 election. Thanks for joining us today on the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. We're right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. And until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
It is a great person, Roger Stone.
The Stone Zone.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.